Hello friends, this is Jennifer Pearson, Thistle Gypsy, doing a review and walkthrough of Carolyn Myss's Archetype cards. And so this is not intended to be a tarot deck or particularly an oracle deck. I think that this is really about exploring identity and exploring your issues and that sort of thing. I haven't decided yet whether I can use it with, in my practice in terms of doing readings for other people. It was curious to go through it and use it kind of as it was intended, at least from what I can tell how it was intended. Which is to go through and kind of select what your primary archetypes would be or are, and looking at whether you are really living your core archetypes or whether you're living some other archetype perhaps in order to survive. And these cards are intended to sort of complement Carolyn Myss's book. And what is that book called? I need to break up some animal issues. Alright, that takes care of that. My terrier, the primary instigator, is now separated from the cat that she particularly loves to pester. And of course she loves to pester that cat because the cat doesn't particularly like her. The book Sacred Contracts. I'll just read you a little bit about Carolyn Myss if you're not already familiar with her. I knew about her because my sister had been aware of her in some respect, and I can't remember exactly what. It says Carolyn Myss is a pioneer in the field of energy medicine and human consciousness. Since 1982, she has worked as a medical intuitive, one who sees illnesses in a patient's body by intuitive means. She specializes in assisting people in understanding the emotional, psychological, and physical reasons why their bodies have developed an illness. Now this is the second deck, I will say, of hers that I have. I have her, this as well. This is 50 cards, and it's Wisdom for Healing cards. And I do like them, although I do have a separate deck review of them. They do have a little, in their messages, a little preachiness. So that annoys me a little bit, but I've kept them, and yeah. And I look at these, the healing decks. Well, I won't go there because that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing the archetype cards. I'm trying not to wander too far here. So we do have a guidebook, and again, this whole concept, is in alignment with her Sacred Contracts book. And I think that really, if you want to use this deck as it was intended, you would get that Sacred Contracts book and read it. I don't think there's any sort of, she doesn't give, no. It's really not about spreads. That's not what it's about. And so there are no spreads or anything here. It's more about choosing the cards that are appropriate for you. Although archetypes are both ancient and universal, they become personalized when they're a part of your own psyche, what I refer to as your sacred contracts, the agreements you make before you're born to learn certain lessons and work with certain people. is embodied in a support system of 12 archetypes. So you're supposed to pick actually 8 cards, because she says that 4 of them are for everybody. Because this group of 12 patterns of behavior is uniquely yours, you should think of them as intimate companions. They provide the foundation for your personality, drive, feelings, beliefs, motivations, and actions. So in some ways, you have to buy into that whole idea. You don't absolutely have to, but she's wanting you to, let's just say that. And so I do like a lot of these archetypes. So you've got the archetype and an image of the cards, additional associations, like here we have engineer, and then we have additional associations, archetype, architect, builder, designer, schemer. A little information: grounded, orderly, strategic qualities, give creative energy a practical expression, talent for engineering everyday situations or designing solutions to common dilemmas. The shadow engineer, or the dark side of the engineer, manifests as a master manipulator, designing situations to one's own advantage regardless of the needs of others. So you can be a psychological engineer, you can be a family engineer, you know, it doesn't have to be a builder necessarily. As we think of the professional engineer in modern society. Look for a pattern of designing. So if this is you, if you're thinking this might be you, this is the significant statement here. You need to look for a pattern in yourself of designing and building structures, devices, or solutions. You know, and whether that is you. So if you habitually, if there's a pattern of you doing this, not that you've done it once or whatever, but there's a pattern in your life of doing it, then that is one of your archetypes. So when and it comes just for the basics. So there's the guidebooks, sturdy box, lovely sturdy box. Lovely sturdy box. And in case one of her archetypes, one of your archetypes is missing, she has 6 cards where you can create your own. I suppose you could paste an image on here if you wanted. As you'll see, there are light attributes and shadow attributes of each card, so you can create your own. That's a lot in there for you to create your own. She does mention in this book that the cards are not all of the archetypes, and one of the fundamental flaws of this deck, I think, even though it does have it's 80 cards, so it does have a wide variety of archetypes here. She says she's chosen the most common ones from among the people who she meets in her workshops. And to me, that is an exclusive group of people. That's a group of people who maybe have been wounded because they're coming to her. It's a group of people who are spiritual seekers, most likely, and that's why they're coming to her. So, to me, this is not going to be completely broad, because it's limited by the assumption, or her using her own clientele as the foundation of the deck, which again means that the deck is really for them. It's not for everyday card readers. It's not for everyone. But it is broad, and so let's go through it so you can see. And I think that this would be, I haven't figured out whether I can, it's a very hefty deck because, decent card, it's a pretty heavy card stock, and 80 cards. I haven't figured out whether I can use it as a tarot and oracle card reader in readings or not. But one thing that was fun to do was to go through, because, a lot of people who are on YouTube looking at tarot decks are doing so in order to explore their psychology. And this deck, that's what this deck is about. It's about exploring your own psychology and what you identify with. And there are some interesting ones. Is you have to whittle down, as you whittle down these 80 cards to only 8, really, if you accept her notion that we all exhibit certain qualities. And so there's 4, she says, 4 negative ones, really. I can't remember, it's the... Well, I won't go into them anyway. 4 of them, she says, everyone has this, as part of their psyche. And then the other 8 you choose. So you have to whittle this 80-card deck down to 8 cards that you feel most represent you. And it's a good psychological exercise. And you can find some surprises in there that are useful and enlightening. If you have a family that is open to this kind of psychological exploration and the idea of archetypes, this would be a great deck to have. You could go through it and the parents could each talk about their archetypes. They could talk about, what is actually expressed and what isn't expressed in their lives. You could, at the earliest age that you could have a child understand this sort of thing, you could ask them to choose their cards and record it somewhere, and then like when they're 18 or 20 or something, ask them to do it again and see if it's the same or different. You could use these cards to say, well, how do you see me? If you were to choose 8 cards for me, what 8 cards would you choose? And that could open up a very interesting discussion. So I can see them as great psychological exploratory tools, most especially within a group of people, a group of friends, to me mostly family, where people are developing and there are different demands at different times. One thing I did, I'll turn this around so you're not looking at just the backing. One thing I did when I first got them is I shuffled them and I chose, what did I do? I shuffled them and I just picked from the top. I chose from the top. To me, that's like you would do for a regular tarot reading. Chose from the top. And I felt like that gave me the archetypes that were active in my life right now. Not my archetypes, but the archetypes that were active in my life right now. Not my core ones necessarily. But it was interesting to do that. And then what I did, instead of shuffling and picking from the top, is I mushed them around in a pile, and then I chose from that, and I felt like that was who I felt like I should be, that those cards I chose at that point were what I felt that I should be. So, or who I want to be, who I should be or who I want to be, as opposed to who I truly am. And how I got to the cards that I felt I truly am is by going through the deck consciously and going through the guidebook and looking at their explanations of the cards. Because sometimes you think that you are something and you read her explanation of the card as she sees it, and you see that, well, not really, that's not me. So it's a worthwhile exploratory deck. But I haven't figured out how I would use it as a tarot and oracle card reader. When I first got it, the reason I wanted to is I thought, when court cards come up, I could pull a couple of cards to see how they're to kind of elaborate on the personality of that person or the role that person is going to play in the life of the querent. It could be that you could pull one of these in a love reading, one to represent the querent and one to represent the person that they are in a relationship with. But again, because of the way she chose the archetypes to include in the deck, I don't know. I don't think we have a card in here that's the day laborer, or what, which I think is an archetype, the earthy man, So there are just things that aren't in here. But anyway, let's go for it. Here's the walkthrough. We have goddess, and again for each one we have light attribute and shadow attribute. And so for this one I will just read those. It says light attribute, the feminine expressed through wisdom, nature, life force, and sensuality. Shadow attribute, exploitation of the female nature and form. Okay, God, damsel, trickster. And again, this is different than the magician. It says light attribute, transcending convention, stuffiness, and predictable behavior. Shadow attribute, manipulating others through duplicity. Virgin, Messiah, hermit, artist, poet. And there are things that come across. Again, you have to read what the guidebook says. I have written poetry. I don't really write now. I've published poetry and when I went through these cards with my sister, and she said, "Oh, but you didn't choose the poet." I said, "Well, I read what was in the guidebook. Doesn't sit with me. It's not right." Student, Midas, miser, warrior. Again, you can see that I don't know if they're all female representations, but a lot of female No, they're not all, because I've already done the hermit as man. Okay. Detective, angel, visionary, guide. Let's see if I can get that. There we go. Judge, rebel, eternal child, and there's more than one child here. Eternal child, liberator, servant, seeker, destroyer, gambler, martyr, knight, vampire, child orphan, avenger, athlete, scribe, shapeshifter, victim, slave, monk or nun. And I know these images are small on here, and I think when I was looking at reviews of the deck, some people were kind of complaining about that, but it's really not about the images. I mean, I think the images are pleasant. I think they support the meanings of the cards, but it's really not about the images. Child divine, prostitute, and again, you need to read in the book. The prostitute is just about the ways that we alter our courses in order to make a living, in order to, we have to get along, we have to make our way in the world. Networker, rescuer, addict, exorcist, healer, mystic, fool, beggar, pioneer, king, companion, prince, father, hedonist, alchemist, mediator, mentor, mother, queen, bully, saboteur, thief, gossip, priest, femme fatale, lover, Samaritan, storyteller, child magical, advocate, child wounded, child nature, Don Juan, hero heroine, dilettante, engineer, teacher. So there you go. And again, I feel like this is a worthwhile deck for people who are, well, for anybody. You know, if you were in a psychological practice, that sort of thing, I think this would be a great deck to have on hand, and you have one session in which the person pulls out the cards that are those 8 cards that really represent them, and you know, have a discussion around whether they are manifested in their life and whether they see them as a light attribute or a shadow attribute in their personality. And so I think it's a deck with really rich psychological potential for exploration, etc. But it's not something. But the person has to have this deck, so you have to do it in person. Yeah, I just don't see, you know. And again, I can see as a card reader how I could do a reading where I pull some cards that, again, say what the person, you know what the person is going through now, you know, what they're exhibiting in their life now, and talk about, you know, something, you know, whether they feel like that's really a deep part of their personality or not. But I don't feel like I could use these cards in the richest way that they could be used, which is to have some conversations around the cards that are chosen and by the person that represent the person, and you know how, you know, whether they're exhibiting them in their life, and how has it been negative, what's their, it's kind of like if you choose the teacher and it's like, well, do you feel like you are exhibiting the light attribute of the teacher or the shadow attribute? And if it's the shadow, well then how can you convert that to the light? How is that? And to me, that would be, the shadow would be an expression of frustration somehow, of not being able to express it as a light attribute. So how have you sort of cheated yourself of that role when it was a role that you actually wanted to play? And how can you turn that around so that it becomes a satisfying and beneficial part, that you're expressing it in a way that's beneficial to yourself and others? Or even some of the cards that she says everyone has, like the prostitute and the victim, is, you know, you could take a minute and you can say, well, to what extent, you know, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that word used with this? Frankly, I think that's too strong of a word, but you know, how, you know, so for those people who really love to dig into light and shadow, particularly those who like to do shadow work. That's a Carol Myss thing. They like to do this shadow work, and say, okay, how am I a prostitute, and how do I feel about that? And the light attribute here says accepting the challenge of surviving without negotiating the power of your spirit. Okay. So, can you turn that around? I can't remember. And you have to choose. So there's prostitute, victim. Yeah. So I'll have to think about it. I really like the cards. Like I said, I think they have tremendous potential, but I'm not sure how they can be used in a tarot and oracle card reading kind of situation, which is the reason that I got them. And I don't, 99% of my reading at this point is with people who are not anywhere near me. It's online readings. It's not in person, because I'm living in Bible Belt, Alabama, and people are just, I would say they're not even very open to personal exploration, let alone something like tarot, and oracle cards and stuff like that. So, I don't know. I'll have to see. I'm reluctant to let them go, but I'm not sure quite how I will use them, since I'm not a psychologist, and that is not really, I think, where I want to go. Again, I could make, I could have a little festival, a little situation where a party, we call it archetype parties. Yeah, I could have archetype parties, and people could come and sort through the cards. Of course, you can't have more than one person sort through the cards at one time, because there's only, one card. One card could apply to all of them. So you could have archetype parties, but then what do you do with the information afterwards? So you've got this set. So you've chosen this set of cards, and maybe you want to, maybe with that group of people you don't want to explore them, but maybe there's one that is really, you've chosen, you're pretty sure that it's you, but you're trying to figure out how it's manifests in your life. Well, you can leave that to that person to sort of explore that on their own, but it's nice to have support. So, I'm not sure how much value there is in it in terms of just picking the cards and setting them out, and then just like, okay, well, those are my archetypes, and then go no further with it. No further. And maybe there is, and I'm underestimating the impact of just identifying the archetypes. I don't know. So it's a bit of a problem. And although the engineer is not one of my archetypes, I'm struggling. I'm trying to imagine and think of ways that I might be able to keep and use this deck within the context of what I do, so that I have a reason to keep them. But I may end up letting them go. So if somebody is watching this video and you're thinking, oh, I know what I could do with those. That would be great. I want those. Feel free to leave a comment below and ask me if I still have them and if I would be interested in either selling them or trading them for something. You're free to do that, and I'll let you know whether or not I still have them. All right, thanks so much for stopping by, listening, liking, sharing, and subscribing to my videos. Have a great day. Bye-bye.